At my graduation party, I saw my father slip powder into my champagne glass. So I stood, smiling, and gave it to my sister. She drank what was meant for me. The glass shimmered in the light as I held it, pretending it was just another moment in the evening. The orchestra played softly in the background, the sound mingling with the low murmur of conversation around me. The air was thick with perfume and cologne, the sharp tang of expensive wine lingering in the corners of the room. I could hear my sister Ava laughing near the bar, her voice light and carefree. She always seemed to be in the center of everything, always glowing, always perfect. I wasn't like her. Not really. The party was everything they wanted it to be. The perfect showcase of achievement, my achievement. My graduation from college was supposed to be a milestone, a proud moment for my parents. But I knew better. I could feel the weight of their expectations like a heavy coat I couldn't shake off. They'd never said it out loud, but I knew how they saw me. I was the steady one, the reliable one. The one who did what was expected, but never what was celebrated. And Ava, of course, was their shining star. I glanced at her now, standing with a group of relatives, her laughter catching in the air like it always did. Her hair was perfectly styled, her dress impeccable. She was everything I was supposed to be, but couldn't quite reach. It was how our family worked. Ava excelled, and well, I faded into the background. As I stood there with the glass, the world around me blurred. I could feel the cold crystal against my palm, the faint bubbles rising slowly. I knew what was inside it, what my father had done. He'd always been this way, calculated, methodical. He didn't care about my success. No. He cared about control. The way the family's image was managed. The way everything had to look perfect. Perfect for him, perfect for Ava, but never for me. I stood there for what felt like a long time, staring at the glass. I felt the usual pang of anger, the frustration that had been bubbling up for years. But there was no room for it here. Not in front of the guests. Not with my family. I had learned long ago how to suppress everything, to keep the peace, to be the quiet one. But tonight was different. Tonight, I wasn't going to let it slide. Not this time. The orchestra swelled as the guests raised their glasses for another toast. The whole scene felt like a blur of expensive suits and polished smiles. Ava was standing right next to me now, smiling as someone made a joke about the ceremony. I didn't hesitate. I lifted the glass, my smile wide and unbothered, and held it out to her. "Here," I said, my voice steady, my hand not shaking. "Take mine. It's the nicer pour." She didn't question it. She never did. Ava took the glass, clinking it gently against mine before lifting it to her lips. I felt nothing. The music played on, and for a moment, everything seemed to pause. Ava drank from the glass I'd given her. She drank what my father had meant for me. The scene around us seemed to slip into slow motion. The guests were still chatting, the laughter still ringing in the air. But I was focused on the tiny moment I had just orchestrated. My sister, my family, unaware of the choice I had just made. The powder settled at the bottom of the glass, just like the secrets buried within this family. Slowly, Ava's face began to change. At first, she didn't notice. But then, her smile faltered. Her skin paled under the warm lights, and her breathing seemed to catch. It wasn't a dramatic collapse. No one screamed. But the silence that followed her sudden shift, her confusion, her panic, was enough to pull the attention of everyone in the room. Ava's knees buckled. Her glass slipped from her hand, rolling across the stone, and that's when everything truly began to fall apart. And as I watched her struggle, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. No, not dread. A certainty. I had done something. Something I could never take back. I had made my choice. I watched as Ava's glass slipped from her hand, the soft clink of it hitting the stone floor, barely audible over the rising hum of the party. The room erupted into chaos, but I stood frozen, my heart thudding in my chest. The moment I had set into motion had arrived, and I couldn't look away. Victor was the first to reach her, his face tightening into something I'd never seen from him before: fear. His usually smooth control, the way he held himself like everything was always under his thumb, faltered. His hands shook as he knelt beside Ava, calling her name with a panic that I knew wasn't just for her, it was for himself too. Helena was next, her composure cracking at the edges as she tried to smooth Ava's hair, her voice trembling with disbelief. "Ava, sweetheart, what's wrong? Speak to me." I felt the weight of their concern, but it didn't reach me. Not anymore. I stood there in the periphery, watching their panic unfold like some tragic performance. It wasn't new, the way they acted when things went wrong. The worry felt rehearsed, as if they had practiced how to perform concern, while still being more worried about their image than anything else. I didn't move. Not yet. My gaze flickered toward the table, where the champagne glasses were arranged, still full, still waiting. My hand tightened around the flute I had held earlier, the one that had been meant for me. I could still feel its weight in my fingers, the warmth of the glass. The moment felt surreal, like I was watching it all from outside my own body. The air felt thick around me, the scent of perfume and cologne mixing with the faintly bitter aftertaste of my decision. It tasted like dust now, dry and heavy. My parents were too busy with Ava to notice me, and I didn't mind. I was always overlooked, always kept in the shadows, where I was safe. But tonight, I had crossed a line, and I could feel it pressing against my chest like a rising tide. The guests had started to notice, their murmurs spreading like a ripple through the crowd. Some gathered near Ava, their faces painted with curiosity, some with concern, but most just stared, unsure of what to do, unsure if they should react at all. I had always been the quiet one, the one who didn't stir the pot. But tonight, I had. And now, here I was, waiting. The seconds stretched long, each one pulling me further away from the person I had been before this moment. I could hear Helena's voice cutting through the noise as she demanded answers from the waitstaff, her words sharp and clipped. Victor was already on his phone, barking orders, probably to his lawyer. The family business always took priority, even when one of their own was in danger. I could feel the distance between us growing, stretching into something unbridgeable. Ava's breath had become shallow, her skin a sickly shade of pale. I stepped forward then, closer to her, because I had to. She needed me. No matter how much I resented her, no matter how much I had grown to envy her, she was still my sister. I knelt beside her, reaching out for her hand. Her fingers were cold in mine, trembling as I held on. I could feel the quiet terror creeping up my spine, but I didn't let it show. Not here, Not now. I had made my choice, and I was going to see it through. Victor finally snapped at one of the paramedics, who had arrived to check on Ava, barking orders like he could control this, too. But it was too late for that. The damage had already been done. The powder in the glass, the careful manipulation, the switch, all of it had led to this moment. Ava was paying the price for something she didn't even know she was a part of. As the paramedics wheeled Ava away, I stood back, watching them push her into the ambulance. I knew they would try to cover it up, try to make it seem like an accident. But I had already set the wheels in motion. There was no going back now. The family I had known, the one that had shaped me, was unraveling, and I was the one who had started it. The elevator ride down was quiet, the hum of the machinery a dull background to the chaos that had just unfolded. I kept my eyes trained on the numbers above the door, watching them change as we descended. The air felt colder, the silence pressing in around me. By the time we reached the ambulance bay, the tension had settled into a kind of numbness. I couldn't feel anything, not really. The adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving only a deep, heavy weariness behind. I was finally free, but at what cost? As they wheeled Ava into the emergency room, I stood outside, letting the chill of the night air seep into my bones. It wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. But I had taken the first step. And that had to be enough for now. The truth was, I had never known what it felt like to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be valued. Not like Ava. She had always been the one who was celebrated, the one who could do no wrong in their eyes. But tonight, that had changed. Tonight, the balance had shifted, and I was the one who had tipped the scale. And as I stood there, alone in the shadows of the hospital, I realized that this was only the beginning. The waiting room smelled faintly of antiseptic and stale coffee. The fluorescent lights hummed above, casting a cold, clinical glow over everything. I leaned against the wall. My arms crossed tightly over my chest, the tension in my body too palpable to ignore. The events of the night were still unraveling in my head, but now that Ava was in good hands, I couldn't stop thinking about the years before any of this had happened. The years spent in that house, in the shadow of my sister, and the toll it had taken on me. Ava, with her perfect grades, her flawless public image, her smile that could light up any room, was always the one who received praise. She was the one who was celebrated. My accomplishments, on the other hand, never seemed to matter. They were just facts, like numbers on a page, things to be expected. When I was 12, I won the state science fair. It was a project I'd put together by myself in the dead of night, without any help, without any encouragement. I tested water samples from the nearby creeks and charted chemical runoff. I was so proud of that ribbon. But when I came downstairs the morning the results came in, no one cared. Victor didn't even look up from his tablet. Helena skimmed through the newspaper, already mentally preparing for her day. Ava, of course, was ready for a debate tournament. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. That day, I walked into the dining room with my ribbon in hand, the bright colors of the award a stark contrast to the dark, indifferent atmosphere. I stood there, waiting for someone to notice. But instead, Victor merely muttered, "Expected. A Harris should excel." And that was it. The same phrase repeated over and over in different contexts. Expectations, no praise, just obligation. The quiet ache that followed never really went away. Ava's trophies lined the shelves in our home, meticulously arranged in their glass cases. I was there too, but always in the background. My science fair ribbon was tucked behind one of her tennis photos. The crooked frame, the way it sat behind the glass, felt symbolic. It was as if even the house itself had internalized that I wasn't meant to be in the spotlight. It wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. It was simply a place for me to exist, without notice. It didn't help that Victor and Helena always seemed to be disappointed in me, despite everything I did to prove my worth. When I told them I wanted to study environmental science, instead of joining the family business, Victor scoffed. He called it a waste. Helena agreed, saying no serious person would want to work in a field with no future. The family business was where success lived, real, tangible success. Environmental science, in their eyes, was nothing but a noble hobby. So, I pursued it anyway. And when I interned with an environmental nonprofit, instead of at the family company, I knew what would come next. Victor had always made his disapproval clear. When he found the email I'd sent to decline the family internship, he placed his spoon down, as if it were an important announcement. "You'll pay for your own mistakes," he said, his tone cool and final. That was all. I nodded, went upstairs, and filled out a student loan application. The air in my room was thick with a strange kind of peace, like something had finally been named. Something that had been looming over me my entire life was now acknowledged, even if only by me. The night before I left for college, Helena folded my clothes with the precision she used when handling Ava's business attire. Her movements were neat and methodical, but there were no words, no goodbye, no encouragement. Just the steady pull of a thread from my sleeve, the only sign of her attention. It wasn't cruelty, it was something worse. Something colder, indifference. She didn't need to say anything for me to understand that I was alone. I learned early that silence could be just as painful as words. My place in the family had been decided long ago, and it wasn't meant to be front and center. I had grown accustomed to being overlooked, to fading into the background. But the more I watched Ava take her place on the pedestal, the more the silence began to burn. It wasn't until I overheard my parents talking about me in the hallway behind the kitchen that I fully understood how little I mattered. I had gone to the bathroom, avoiding the line at the main restroom, when I heard their voices, low and urgent. I froze just outside the door, the cool, sterile air of the service hallway wrapping around me. "She can't have access to that trust," Helena whispered, her voice sharp. "Not when everything is already unstable." Victor's response was even colder. "If she's independent, she can talk about the waste, the reports, the samples. You know what that means." There was a pause, then his voice dropped lower. "If she's hospitalized even briefly, the transfer stalls. And if something worse happens before the paperwork clears." Helena inhaled sharply. "Victor, it's precision. Controlled setback," he clarified. "Nothing lethal, unless she reacts badly. We need time, that's all." I felt the floor slip beneath me. The words were like ice, sinking into my chest. They weren't talking about disciplining me or controlling me. They were talking about me like I was a liability, a problem to be managed. They had already planned for me to disappear again. They would make sure I was no threat to Ava, to their perfect family image. I backed away quietly, my fingers still gripping the door handle. I didn't want them to hear me. Didn't want them to know I had overheard everything. My heartbeat was in my throat, the slow, steady burn of betrayal taking hold. I had been invisible to them for so long, and now I knew why. I left the hallway behind me, returning to the rooftop, where the party was still unfolding. The guests were oblivious, lost in their own worlds of laughter and shallow conversations. But everything had changed for me. The path I had been walking, the quiet life I had accepted, was no longer an option. My family had made their choices. Now, it was time for me to make mine. The party continued in the background. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the orchestra still playing, as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, watching as Victor and Helena hovered over Ava. Their movements were frantic, desperate, but it wasn't for her sake. It was for their own. The facade they had worked so hard to build was crumbling before them, and they could already feel it. I could see Victor's face twitching, the sharpness in his jaw betraying his calm exterior. He was used to being in control, used to having everything go exactly how he wanted. But tonight, it had all spiraled out of his hands. I wondered, in that moment, if he had ever truly cared for anyone in this family, or had it always been about the image, the power, the control. Helena was quieter, more composed on the surface. But I could see the crack in her perfect mask. She wasn't crying. Not yet. Instead, she hovered by Ava's side, smoothing her hair, whispering softly to her, though the words were too low for anyone to hear. But I could hear the desperation behind the smoothness. I could feel it in the air between us, thick and suffocating. I looked at Ava, who was now pale and gasping for air, her body limp as they tried to revive her. She was my sister, flesh and blood. And yet she had always been the one who was cherished. She had always been the one who could do no wrong. Tonight, for the first time, it wasn't her name being whispered in concern, but mine. I couldn't help but wonder how long it would take for her to realize that all these years of being the favored one had come at a price. One that neither of us had been ready to pay. When the paramedics arrived, their presence was a loud reminder of how far things had gone. They moved with purpose, calm and efficient, but I could see the confusion in their eyes when they looked at the family. No one spoke much to me, not yet. I wasn't a priority anymore. But I knew I had done something. Something irreversible. I didn't want to think about what had happened. I didn't want to focus on the glass, the powder, the decision I had made. Instead, I let myself drift away from the scene, retreating to the shadows of the rooftop. The night air was cooler up here, the sounds of the party muffled by the distance. I needed space, needed time to breathe. I paced slowly, the wind biting at my skin. But it was the only thing that felt real. The lights of the city twinkled below, distant and indifferent. I was standing on the edge of everything, staring at the city that had always felt like it belonged to someone else. Not me. Not my family. We had never belonged here. The house I grew up in wasn't mine. The reputation I had inherited wasn't mine. and tonight, I had finally taken something for myself. The balcony was silent, the only sound the occasional hum of a passing car far below. I closed my eyes, breathing in the cool air, feeling it fill my lungs. For the first time in a long time, I could hear myself think. No more waiting for someone to notice me. No more trying to make my accomplishments matter to people who didn't care. No more pretending that I was fine, that I fit into the mold they had made for me. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself staring at the glass still in my hand. It felt heavier now, like a weight that had settled into my bones. I didn't know what I expected when I handed it to Ava. I didn't know if I thought she'd even drink it, if I thought things would unfold the way they did. But in the quiet that surrounded me, the weight of my decision began to settle in. It wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't about hurting anyone. It was about taking control, taking something back that had been taken from me for years. I could hear footsteps behind me, the sound of heels on the stone. I turned slowly, expecting someone, but it was just a waiter, carrying another tray of champagne. He didn't look at me, just passed by, offering the tray to the group of guests now gathered by the bar. The party carried on without me, as it always had. It was strange, how easily people could go on with their lives, even as something had shifted so profoundly. It was as if nothing mattered until it did, and by then, it was too late. I felt the world pressing in again, the pressure of expectation, the crushing weight of a family built on lies. But there was no going back now. I had crossed the line, and for once, I wasn't apologizing for it. When I turned to look back at the party, I saw my father near the bar, speaking with someone in hushed tones. His voice was too low for me to catch, but the tightness in his posture told me everything I needed to know. He was trying to control the narrative, trying to make sure no one found out the truth. I wondered if he even realized how much had already been exposed. How much of his control, his power, had slipped away without him even knowing it. And the thought of it gave me a strange sense of peace. I wasn't just a passive observer anymore. Tonight, I had made the decision. Tonight, I had taken control. And no matter what happened next, I wouldn't be the same person who had walked into this party. The emergency room was a blur of harsh white lights, sterile surfaces, and the constant beeping of machines. Ava was surrounded by doctors and nurses, each moving with practiced efficiency. I could hear their voices, but they sounded muffled, as if I were underwater. My eyes kept darting back to the door. Waiting for the moment when I could go in, waiting for confirmation that she was going to be okay. Victor and Helena were already there, standing apart from the medical team, their expressions tight with controlled fear. They were trying so hard to keep it together, but their posture betrayed them. Victor stood with his back straight, hands clasped in front of him, as though he could will the situation into submission. Helena, on the other hand, was wringing her hands, glancing over her shoulder, every few seconds, as though looking for someone to explain what was happening. They hadn't noticed me at first. I stood in the corner of the room, near the vending machines, watching them try to navigate a situation they couldn't control. This wasn't like one of their corporate meetings, where they could sweep problems under the rug with the right words and a well-timed smile. No, this was real, and it was happening to them. And for the first time in a long time, I felt no desire to intervene. A nurse walked past me, her face calm but purposeful as she checked a clipboard. "Is she stable?" I asked quietly, my voice feeling like a foreign thing, heavy in my throat. The nurse looked up for a moment, then nodded. "She's stabilized. We're keeping her under observation, but we don't expect any lasting damage. She'll be awake soon." Relief, warm and heavy, settled in my chest. But it wasn't complete. Not yet, it couldn't be. The door to Ava's room opened, and one of the doctors stepped out. He was calm, with a slight frown, tugging at the corners of his lips, as though he was piecing something together in his head. He glanced at Victor and Helena, then shifted his gaze to me. "You're her sister?" he asked, his voice even but sharp with professional detachment. I nodded, swallowing against the knot in my throat. "We need to ask a few questions about what happened," he said, his eyes briefly flicking toward the door, as if checking to see if anyone else was listening. "The symptoms she's displaying, confusion, elevated heart rate, tremors, point to an exposure to a substance that doesn't appear to be in any of the typical commercial drugs. It's research grade." Victor's eyes narrowed at the mention of research grade. I saw the brief flash of recognition, something darker in his eyes. His hand twitched slightly, but he said nothing. I had expected this, the quiet panic. I could almost hear him calculating, trying to figure out how to shift the narrative, how to make sure no one blamed him. No one blamed the family. The doctor continued, oblivious to the underlying tension. "We'll be running a full battery of tests. But we need to know if she's had any exposure to chemicals or drugs recently, any kind of irregular substance in her system." The question hung in the air, heavy and charged. Victor opened his mouth, but before he could speak, I answered. "She's had nothing unusual, just regular food, drink. Nothing out of the ordinary," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos in my chest. The truth was that I knew exactly what had happened. I knew who had poisoned the drink. The doctor nodded, seeming satisfied with my answer, and turned to leave. But not before I caught his glance toward Victor, who was still standing rigidly by the door. There was something in that look, something unspoken, a subtle warning. As soon as the doctor left, Helena turned sharply toward me. She wasn't crying, but I could see the cracks in her calm. She was trying to hold it together, but it was slipping. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You need to understand, Hazel," she began, her voice tight with something I couldn't place. "This is not how it looks. We never meant for any of this to happen." I felt the familiar rush of anger flare up inside me. "You never mean for things to happen, do you?" I bit back the words that wanted to spill out. How they'd controlled everything. How they'd shaped my life in their image, without ever considering what I wanted. I kept it in, though. "For now." "What are you talking about?" I asked, voice icy. Helena paused, eyes flicking to Victor, who was still standing stiffly, as though he could will the world back into order. She stepped even closer, her voice low but urgent. "You don't know the full story, Hazel. You think you do, but you don't. What happened tonight? It's just a misunderstanding. We were trying to protect the family. All of us." I felt the words hit like a slap. Protect the family. Was that what this was all about? The same family that had silenced me for years, the same family that had put Ava on a pedestal, while I was left to drown in their expectations. This was protection. I opened my mouth to speak, but Victor's voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. That's enough. He walked over, placing himself between me and Helena, his face drawn in that familiar, controlled mask. Hazel, you don't know what you're talking about. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. He didn't get it. They never did. They never understood how much they had hurt me, how much they had taken from me. They thought they could control everything. But now they were facing something bigger than their carefully crafted world. Ava's collapse was the beginning of the unraveling, and there was no going back now. I wanted to say something. Tell them how much they had done to me, how much they had tried to break me. But instead, I stayed silent, the words hanging like a bitter taste on my tongue. I glanced at the door to Ava's room, then back at my parents. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to defend them. For the first time, I didn't care what they thought of me. Ava would be fine, I knew. But I wasn't sure how much of the rest of us would be. The hours stretched on, each minute dragging by like a slow, agonizing countdown. I sat in the sterile waiting room. The hum of fluorescent lights above, and the occasional click of someone's shoes on the tiled floor, echoing in the stillness. The constant beeping of the machines in the emergency room was the only sound that seemed to keep time. I hadn't moved from my spot, hadn't looked away from the door to Ava's room. She was still in there, still being monitored. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I was waiting for something I couldn't control. Victor and Helena had gone quiet, their voices dropping to whispers. They hadn't spoken to me since the paramedics had arrived. I could feel their eyes on me, but they knew better than to approach. It was as if the air between us had thickened, making it impossible for them to speak to me without breaking some invisible rule. I tried to focus on the passing moments, trying to ignore the gnawing sensation in my chest that had been with me for years. The feeling that I wasn't a part of this family, that I never truly belonged. Ava's collapse had shattered their world. And I had done that. For once, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't just the quiet, obedient daughter. I was the one who had done something, taken control in a way that I never thought possible. The thoughts kept swirling in my mind, each one a reminder of everything I had endured. The years of being overlooked, of being pushed aside. The time when I'd been ignored at every family dinner, my accomplishments dismissed, as if they were mere footnotes to Ava's achievements. The science fair ribbon, the countless hours spent working on environmental reports no one cared to read, and the quiet moments when I realized I was never going to be seen the way she was. I was the backup, the understudy, the one who had been forced to fade into the background. But not tonight. Tonight, everything had changed. A door opened at the far end of the room, and I stood up instinctively, my pulse quickening. A nurse emerged, her face composed, but there was something in her eyes that made me feel like I was on the edge of something huge. "She's stable," the nurse said, her voice calm but firm. "We've got her hooked up to a few more monitors, but she's conscious and aware now. You can go in and see her." I felt a weight lift from my chest, but it wasn't the kind of relief I expected. It wasn't just the relief that came from knowing Ava was going to be okay. It was something deeper, something more unsettling. My sister, the one who had always been the center of attention, was now the one who needed me. I walked toward the door, my legs feeling heavy, as if each step was pulling me deeper into a truth I hadn't fully grasped yet. When I entered the room, I saw Ava lying in the bed, her face pale, her eyes wide open but distant. She looked so fragile in that moment, so vulnerable. It was a stark contrast to the image I had of her, always poised, always perfect. She hadn't noticed me right away. Her gaze was fixed on the ceiling, and I could see her chest rise and fall with each shallow breath. I stepped closer, my footsteps soft against the sterile floor. She turned her head toward me, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence between us. "How are you feeling?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. Ava blinked, her eyes unfocused at first, then sharpening, as if she were trying to make sense of her surroundings. "What happened?" she asked, her voice hoarse, as though the words were hard to form. I don't remember. Everything's fuzzy." I nodded, my mind racing. "You collapsed at the party. You drank something, and it affected you." She winced slightly, her brows furrowing. "Something, what do you mean?" I hesitated, the words hanging between us, the truth so close but still untold. "Ava, someone poisoned you. With something, no." Her voice was sharp now, cutting through my words. "No, that doesn't make sense. Who would do that?" I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. The truth was still sitting on the tip of my tongue. But I couldn't bring myself to say it. I couldn't say the words I knew would change everything. She wouldn't understand. How could she? "I don't know," I said quietly. "But they were trying to hurt me." Ava's eyes widened, a mixture of confusion and disbelief crossing her face. "What do you mean?" I swallowed hard, looking at her, feeling the weight of all the years between us. The silence that had filled the room was thick now, the space between us wide and growing. I took a deep breath. "They don't care about me, Ava. You're their priority. I've always been in the background." She looked at me, searching my face, as if she were trying to piece everything together. "What are you talking about?" I could feel the years of resentment bubbling up, the frustration I'd kept buried for so long. It wasn't just about tonight. It was everything. All the times I had been ignored, all the ways they had made me feel small. "They've always put you first," I said, my voice trembling now, betraying me. "I've never been seen. Never been enough. It's always been you, Ava. You're the one they want. The one they love." Ava stared at me, her expression unreadable, as if the weight of my words was sinking in. For a long moment, there was only silence. I couldn't look at her anymore. I couldn't bear to see the confusion in her eyes. "You don't understand, do you?" I whispered, my words barely audible. They were never going to let me win. Ava's hand moved slightly, reaching for mine. I flinched at the touch, but she didn't pull away. "Hazel, I don't." "You'll never understand," I interrupted, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "You can't." The silence stretched between us again, this time heavier than before. She didn't speak, and I didn't try to explain further. What was the point? It was clear now. I had never been part of their perfect family. I had always been the second choice, the one they kept around to play the supporting role. but no more. I had done something tonight, and that choice would be the one thing they could never control again. Ava's hand tightened around mine, but I didn't respond. We both knew, in that moment, that nothing would ever be the same again. The tension in the room was palpable as Victor and Helena tried to compose themselves. They were still pretending everything was fine, but their false calm only made the situation more suffocating. It was as if the room itself could feel their panic, the walls closing in on their well-maintained masks. I stood at the periphery, watching them, feeling the weight of the truth press on me, like a stone in my chest. I hadn't expected to feel so detached, but now that I was here, it was clear, this was the beginning of the end. The end of the carefully constructed world they'd built for me, for Ava, for all of us. The detective's voice snapped me back to reality. He was talking to Victor now, his tone measured, but there was an edge of something sharper underneath. "Mr. Harris," the detective said, "we need to go over everything again. I need you to tell me exactly what happened at the party." Victor's eyes flicked to me, his expression shifting just a fraction, but it was enough to notice. His jaw tightened as if bracing for the worst. "I already told you," he replied, his voice strained but steady. "Ava had an allergic reaction. Nothing more to it." The detective's gaze didn't waver. "We've already established it wasn't an allergic reaction. This was something else, something much more serious." I watched as Victor's composure cracked just slightly. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, his eyes darted to Helena, who was standing by the door, her back rigid, arms crossed in front of her chest. Helena didn't meet the detective's gaze. She kept her eyes focused on the ground, her face pale. But there was something in the way she clenched her fists that told me she wasn't as unaffected as she was trying to appear. The detective turned toward her now. "Helena, I'm going to need you to tell me everything you know. We're gathering evidence, and the sooner you cooperate, the sooner this can be over for everyone." For a moment, I thought she was going to speak. I could see her jaw working, the fight building in her eyes. But instead, she bit her lip and said nothing. The silence stretched. I could hear the faint buzz of the overhead lights, the soft click of the detective's pen tapping against his notebook. It felt like the room was shrinking, the air thicker with each passing second. Victor finally broke the silence, his voice low but insistent. "You don't understand. This is our family's business. You can't just..." The detective raised a hand, cutting him off. "This is no longer just your family's business. Mr. Harris. We're talking about criminal activity here. I have evidence that suggests otherwise, and I will pursue it if necessary. We know about the trust. We know about the chemical compound. And we know about your access to it." Victor froze. For the briefest moment, he looked like he had been struck. His lips parted, but no sound came out. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said finally, his voice a little too sharp. "This is a mistake." I felt a strange sense of clarity, one I hadn't expected. I wasn't just a victim anymore. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about everything they had tried to hide for years. The secrets, the lies. They were all coming to the surface now. I took a step forward, my presence barely noticeable in the room, but I was there. And my voice, when it came, was steady. She drank what was meant for me, I said quietly. Victor whipped his head toward me, his eyes wide with shock. What are you talking about? His voice cracked slightly, but he quickly regained his control. That's ridiculous. You're making a mistake. I'm not making a mistake, I said. Ava drank what you meant for me. You and Mom, you've been trying to control me for years. And this was just the last straw. The room seemed to hold its breath. Victor and Helena both stared at me, their faces a mixture of disbelief and confusion. But I wasn't finished. You never cared about me, I continued, my voice firmer now. Not really. I've been a footnote in this family. A shadow. You've always made me feel like I wasn't enough. And now, you've made a choice to silence me. Permanently. Ava stirred in the bed, her hand twitching, but she didn't open her eyes. Her breathing had steadied, but she was still in a haze, barely aware of the conversation happening around her. I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of everything settle into place. Victor opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His lips parted, his chest rising and falling quickly, as if he were trying to decide what to say. Helena stepped forward, her eyes pleading with me, but I didn't back down. This isn't how it's supposed to go, she said softly. We were just trying to protect the family. You don't understand. Everything was falling apart, and you were protecting yourselves. I cut her off. Not me. Not Ava. Just yourselves. Victor slammed his fist against the wall, his frustration spilling over. The detective stepped forward, his expression hardening. That's enough, the detective said, his voice low but firm. You'll speak to me now. Not to each other. I looked at Victor, at Helena, and for the first time, I didn't see them as my parents. I saw them as the broken, desperate people they were. They had manipulated, controlled, and ignored me for so long, but tonight, I had taken my own power back. The detective led them away, his voice calm but stern as he instructed them to follow him for questioning. As they left the room, I stood still, staring after them. The walls of this family, so carefully constructed, were crumbling around us. And there was no stopping it now. I walked to Ava's side, sitting in the chair beside her. She was still unconscious, but her pulse had steadied. She would be fine, eventually. But I knew now that nothing would ever be the same. This was the moment everything changed. The quiet of the lake house was almost eerie, after the noise and chaos of the past few days. The air was still, and the light through the windows was soft, casting long shadows across the floor. Outside, the lake shimmered gently under the morning sun, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions I had been battling for so long. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something. But I wasn't sure what that something was anymore. I stepped onto the porch, my feet bare against the cool wood, and let the silence wash over me. The only sounds were the soft rustling of the trees, and the occasional bird call. I stood there for a long time, looking out at the water. The weight of the past few weeks heavy on my shoulders, but oddly lighter than it had been before. Ava was recovering, slowly but surely. She had been discharged from the hospital, after a couple of days of observation. Her body still weak but her spirit, surprisingly, stronger than I had expected. She had been quiet since we left the hospital. Her thoughts, seemingly caught between the world she had known and the one she was beginning to see for the first time. I didn't blame her. The truth had crashed into both of us, and neither of us knew how to handle it. I didn't know what to say to her anymore. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, but it was different now. The walls we had built over the years, the ones that separated us, had cracked open in a way that couldn't be undone. But it wasn't just Ava that I was navigating now. It was my entire life. Everything I had once thought was true, the family I had always believed in, all of it shattered in ways I hadn't anticipated. I moved into the kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee mingling with the scent of wood and earth. It was simple here, quieter than I had ever imagined. This house had always been a place of refuge for me. But now, it felt like the beginning of something else, something I hadn't yet figured out. The laptop was still open on the table, the notes I had been working on for weeks now, scattered across the screen. The case against my parents was slowly coming together. The federal investigators had gathered everything, emails, documents, even evidence of their access to chemicals that had been used in the poisoning. It felt surreal to see it all laid out in front of me, each piece falling into place like a puzzle that had been waiting for me to find it. I knew there was no turning back now. The decision to expose everything, to take control of my own life, had already been made. But as I looked at the case files, the weight of it all settled in. This wasn't just about the family anymore. This was about a life I was finally beginning to reclaim, a future I had never thought possible. I wasn't sure how to feel about any of it. Anger. Yes, it was there, simmering beneath the surface, but there was something else too. Something quieter. Something more freeing. I could feel it deep inside, like a weight being lifted. It wasn't relief, not exactly. It was more like acceptance. I was accepting that everything I had been told about who I was, about my place in this family, was a lie. And now, I was free to figure out who I wanted to be, outside of their expectations. I heard footsteps behind me, soft but deliberate. Ava stood in the doorway, her face still a little pale, but more herself than I had seen in a long time. She was wearing one of my old sweaters. The sleeves rolled up, her hair loose and falling around her shoulders. For the first time, she didn't look like the picture, perfect daughter. She looked real. I turned toward her, offering a smile that felt a little too small for what I was feeling. But it was a smile, nonetheless. I was thinking of taking a walk down to the lake, I said, my voice quiet but steady. Want to come? She hesitated for a moment, then nodded, her lips curving slightly. Yeah, I'd like that. We walked together, side by side, the cool morning air brushing against our skin. The silence between us was comfortable now, not strained. As we made our way toward the water, the world around us seemed to soften. The sharp edges of everything that had happened fading into the background. For the first time, in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of peace, of clarity. It wasn't about the fight, the betrayal, or the years of being invisible. It was about moving forward, about building something new. I had spent so long trying to hold on to a family that had never truly seen me, but now, for the first time, I was beginning to see myself. As we reached the edge of the lake, I stopped, looking out over the water. The sun was rising higher, its light turning the surface of the lake into a sparkling mirror. Ava stood beside me, her gaze fixed on the horizon. I never realized how much I didn't know, she said softly, breaking the silence between us. About you. About everything. I didn't know how to respond to that. I could feel the words I had been holding back, but I didn't say them. Not yet. I don't expect you to, I replied, my voice steady. But I'm okay now. I'm figuring things out. Ava turned to me then, her eyes a little clearer, a little more understanding. I don't know what's next, but I'm here, she said. And I won't let you face it alone. I nodded. The weight of everything shifting, just a little, becoming lighter. Maybe there was hope after all. Not in the things I had lost, but in the things I could still find. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was something new. Something real. And in that moment, standing at the edge of the lake, I realized that the life ahead of me wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't about fixing what had been broken, or fighting against a family that didn't care. It was about moving forward. About reclaiming a future that was finally mine. As the breeze stirred the water, I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the quiet wash over me. I didn't need to have all the answers. Not yet. But for the first time, I knew that I was in control of what came next. And that was enough. Everything had changed. And for the first time, that felt okay.